Welcome, colleagues. I can see that we've just had over 175 people join us in the room. So you're very, very welcome, and we're just about to start. If you want to ensure that you are able to hear us, that would be great. I have my microphone turned on. You can hear me, Alicia and Mary, yes?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Perfectly.
So everybody should be able to hear me. And we're going to get started. If you have any problems, we'll give you some information on what it is that you need to do. All right, so you're very, very welcome. My name is Katrina Bradley. I'm the director of the Irish Institute of Pharmacy. And it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here this evening to our first webinar for the entire profession. And we are going to be talking about developing resilience in pharmacy and the role of optimism. And we're joined by Dr. Mary Cobb, and she will be leading through this evening. So what I'm going to ask is domestics first. I won't spend very long because we really do want to get to the nuts of the evening and to the core of what we're talking about. But I'm just letting people into the room there. So if you can keep your microphones muted, please, because I'm sure many of us have started to get used to webinars and online meetings over the last couple of weeks. So some of the usual domestics, if you can keep your microphone muted, that would be brilliant. If you want to keep your video on, do. It's always lovely to see familiar faces, and one of the great things about this evening is actually going to be able to see our colleagues and connect with them. But if you want to keep it off as you wish, that's fine. If you've any problems with connectivity, if we freeze on the screen, hopefully it'll be on a nice face, but if you do freeze or anything happens, maybe turn your video off, because that can sometimes cause difficulties with connectivity. If there's any difficulty with your sound, ensure that the sound and the speaker aren't muted, and then turn down on your computer, and then try logging off and on again. If that fails, that tends to really address most issues. If you can use the comments box for questions or comments, as we go through it, we'll have some of our colleagues will be looking at that, and they'll be able to take any comments and feed them through to myself and Mary. This recording has been, this meeting has been recorded, and the reason we're doing that is to make it available for colleagues who aren't able to be with us this evening, but who might be able to, who would want to be available afterwards to hear it. And we may use some of the anonymized information from this webinar. The issue of resilience, particularly in pharmacy during COVID, is particularly of particular interest to the international research community. We absolutely will not be sharing any details, but more themes from the talk and the conversation we have today. Now, before I go any further, can everybody hear me okay? Alicia, can you tell me?
Yes, everyone can.
I think I was a little bit quieter there at the beginning, was I?
I could still hear you fine, and there's a lot of people saying hello as well in the chat box to you.
Lovely. Hello. It's great to be connected. This is really, really nice, actually. In the middle of all the social distancing, it's fabulous to actually be connected with you all. So let me just tell you very quickly why we are doing this webinar. Essentially, when the whole COVID situation arose, we went to our peer support network. Now, any of you who have ever heard me speak about the peer support network will know that we hold them in huge regard, and they're very, very good at helping us to understand how we best need to support colleagues, and also in feeding through to us messages and kind of guidance from the profession. So they identified a number of issues, and we're pursuing a number of them with the HSE, and our next webinar next Wednesday will be on infection control in community pharmacies. But this topic of resilience came up repeatedly, where pharmacists felt that they were really feeling quite depleted, and they were quite worried about burnout. So what we decided to do was to, sorry, I'm going backwards. When we're talking about resilience, we're talking about the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Some people might say it's toughness. I don't think it's toughness so much as maybe agility or flexibility to be able to cope with the environment you're in. And resilience is an incredibly broad topic. You really, when you're thinking about resilience, you need to think about the physical aspects, how you look after yourself physically, cognitively and mentally, and your thought process and your emotions, and the idea of having spiritual or purpose and meaning. So there's a lot in terms of resilience, and you'll see books and books and books on it. So we weren't going to be able to deal with it all in one topic, and we agreed that we'd start with one aspect of it, looking at the cognitive aspect of resilience. And there's a lot that can be covered here, thinking about how you access and sustain positive emotions, particularly in tough environments, how you can feel optimistic even if there isn't a lot to be optimistic about in certain circumstances, and the importance of positive self-talk. Now again, we really wanted to have something that was going to be incredibly relevant and pertinent to you. So we just decided to go with one small aspect of resilience, which is optimism. Depending on how you feel about this evening and the feedback that we get, we'd be more than happy to run other webinars, and we will be looking for your feedback on that before the end of the night. So what my aspiration for us all from this evening is to get some tangible tools that we can start to implement immediately. Tomorrow in our pharmacies, what could we do differently that would help us towards being more resilient in the current situation? So when I heard from the profession that resilience was the topic we needed to focus on, Dr. Mary Collins came straight to my mind, and I've put up a slide here with all of her credentials, but I suppose for me, Mary was the obvious choice, not by virtue of any of this expertise that she has, and she has plenty. But when I have met her and worked with her, and I've known her for years now in coaching circles, her empathy, her understanding of practicalities, and her real in-depth empathy with people is really outstanding. And I really felt that she would be a great person to invite to our inaugural set of webinars, our inaugural webinar. So I'll introduce you in a moment and I'll hand over to Mary, but just to let you know the format for this evening. We're going to do a little bit on who's on the call. We then will have the presentation from Mary and talk a little bit about that. We'll leave some space for questions and discussion, and please feel free to use the chat box. There is, if any of you see, it may be on the bottom, it may be on the top of your screen, but there is a chat function. Alicia, can you tell us where it is on most people's screens?
For most people, it'll be down at the end. Along the bottom, it'll say chat, but if you're on an iPhone or other type of mobile device, it may actually be up at the top. Okay. But even if anybody has an issue, oh, well, you don't have the chat to send me a message.
Yeah. But this will be recorded and available afterwards. So we'll be finished by 9. We know the importance of your time, and we're just so happy that you're here with us this evening, and that there's so many people, almost 200 people on the call. It really shows that this is a very relevant topic. So before I hand over to Mary, what I'd really like to do is ask, who do we have with us this evening? And there's going to be a poll popping up on your screens in just a moment. And we're going to be asking you, can you please indicate your main area of practice? Now, I know there are people in niche areas, so you may not be able to have something for everybody. So other is fine if either you're not a pharmacist, because I'm aware we may have some non-pharmacists, or if your area of practice isn't covered. But generally, are you working in community, hospital, academia, industry, regulatory affairs, administrative, or if you're a non-pharmacist? Okay, so I'm just going to give that another minute. 139 people have voted, 140, 150. Okay. So 150 of you have voted, and there may be, some of you may not be able to access it. So I'm just going to share that with you now. So sharing the results, 72% of you are from community pharmacy. Welcome, community colleagues. 15% from hospital. It's lovely to have you with us, hospital colleagues. Thank you. 5% of you are from working in academic settings, so thank you to you for joining us this evening. I'm sure some of you are really in the middle of marking and whatnot for the end of year exams. And to our industry, regulatory affairs and our administrative colleagues, you're very, very welcome. We have a non-pharmacist in the room, you're very welcome too. And then we have some others. So that's giving us a sense. 112 of our community colleagues are with us this evening. So that gives us a sense of who's in the room. So on that note, I am going to pass over to Dr. Mary Collins, who will really be leading us through the events of this evening. So Mary, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if you can take over, that would be great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katrina. Let's get up and running here. Um, okay, can everyone see the? Yes, perfect. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to Katrina, Alicia, and the team in IIOP. I'm really delighted to be here, and thanks to each and every one of you for taking time out on this sunny Wednesday evening to join us for this webinar. Um, it's a really important topic, and I know it's a very difficult time. I see in the poll that almost 3/4 of you are in community pharmacy, and I had a personal insight yesterday to the importance of the work you're all doing. I went to visit my elderly parents, and my dad is in his late 70s. He's immune suppressed and struggling a bit at the moment. So I popped over, and he asked me to take a photograph of his toe and email it to his local pharmacist. So if you got an email of a toe picture yesterday, that was from me. But it struck me, you know, the relationship that my dad had with his local pharmacist, and that connection and the reassurance and care that was shown. So for me, that just gave me an insight into the really invaluable work that's being done at the moment. Um, so this evening, my objective is really twofold. Firstly, that we explore the whole area of optimism, and that you leave the webinar with a good understanding as to why it's so important. And secondly, and this is really my greatest wish, is that everybody on the webinar this evening leaves with one or two practical actions to take away. So, practical strategies to support you in developing your resilience at this time. So, what are we going to look at? Well, we're going to take a look at really the current reality and just check in with everyone as to how they're finding things at the moment. I'm always really impressed with pharmacy as a profession, because there's great collaboration and support. I think even your peer support network is just wonderful. So let's just check in with how people are. We're going to talk about our negativity bias, our sort of natural instinct to focus on the negative. And then we're going to look at the whole area of learned optimism, and finish off with 3 practical takeaways. They're all evidence-based strategies that we know really work to develop resilience. So that is what we're going to do. But just to get us started, it would be really great if people could just reflect just how you're feeling right now and just share with us one word. So maybe Katrina, I might hand over to you for this, please.
Yeah, so you'll see on the slide that Mary has up that there's a website, menti.com. Now, what that's going to allow us to do is together create a word cloud of how, as a collective, we're feeling, and with all of our different words. So if you have a smartphone with you, or if you can use the browser at the same time, just open another tab. If you can open this website, menti.com, and use the code, you'll be prompted to put in a code, and the code is 110037. 110037. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that just develop a little bit, and then I'm going to share my screen. So it'll be interesting for us all just to see how each other are feeling and to see it actually evolve. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, stopping yours, Mary, and let's just see how our feelings are evolving. Can you see my screen?
Brilliant, yes. Fantastic. Just while people are typing in their one word, it's so important that we do tune in to how we're feeling. And this is really the pillar of emotional intelligence. And it's not about judging, or it's just about observing how are you feeling. If we can, bottle up or push down how we're feeling, it will persist and it can emerge in very negative ways. So just to check in and acknowledge and accept how you're feeling is important. So tired, stressed, anxious, exhausted, pressure. Yeah. apprehensive, unsettled. There's a happy in there, drained, contemplative. Trapped. That's an interesting one. Calm. Frustrated. Pressure.
So at the moment we have 101 people who've contributed. It's going up more slowly now. It may be that some people are finding it difficult. They may not have access to a website, but we'll leave it just evolve for another. I think there's a very strong number of themes there, Mary, that you're able to see, but and I may not have been entirely precise in how I explained how to do this. The pressure somebody has written on, I think, is probably quite apt
Yes.
written over it. So I have no problem with that being there. But I must, whoever that is, I must ask you how you did it, because I don't know how. So I can learn something from this evening for sure. I'm going to see, can I present this? But I am a little bit afraid. We have 112 people. I know it takes a little bit of time, but the things I'm seeing there is exhausted, worried, ambivalent. I saw her relaxed though, and happy is becoming a little bit more prominent. Busy. It's always difficult, isn't it, Mary, when you've only one word? If you had two, you'd kind of counterbalance and say tired, but you know, content. But actually, there's a relaxed and a calm.
Yeah.
Uncertain. Optimistic. There's some people optimistic.
Great.
We do have a few messages coming through in the chat as well, and there's a few optimistics.
Oh, somebody took off their pressure. I don't know how you did that. Yeah, what else is in the comments, Alicia?
Optimistic and resigned. Stressed, cannot access the site. Sorry, that's somebody stressed they can't access. But even if you wanted to share your word here. And hamster is another word that we have coming through in the chat.
What was that word?
Hamster.
Hamster.
Oh, hamster on a wheel.
Yeah. I presume that's sort of, just the Groundhog Day feeling and just being on a wheel,
We do have two words, and they apologize that they've given two words, but they're saying fed up.
Oh, well, that's one word.
And tedious, but we also have great and we have hopeful.
Okay.
So a mix.
So I think this is how we're looking, Mary.
Really, really interesting. And I think some very clear themes coming through. Definitely the exhaustion is clear, anxious, people are overwhelmed, they're frustrated. We have some who are relaxed, happy, which is great. Worried, emotional, stretched.
I see adrenaline.
Adrenaline, yeah.
And trapped.
Yeah, trapped. That's a really interesting one. Disjointed is there as well. Yeah.
Undervalued. I see that quite a lot within, but contemplative.
Contemplative.
Okay.
Okay, all
You
together.
take back whenever you're ready, Mary. I think you kind of tired is in the middle consistently. Stressed and anxious coming very close second and third. So I suppose at a minimum, if you're feeling this way, I love that. If you're feeling this way, actually, your colleagues, you're not alone. And so there's a lot that we can talk about this evening, I think, Mary, that's going to really talk to those particular things. Terrible. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to see some of my colleagues feeling that way. I really am, for such an amazing bunch of people who are on the front line delivering such care, taking photos of people's toes and looking at them and feeling this way. On a personal level, I'm sorry some of you are feeling that way, and hopefully together we can discover ways in which we can alleviate it a little. We're not going to solve the world, but hopefully we can do something.
Great. So thanks to everyone who contributed there. I just think it's good to, again, just tune in to how we're feeling at the moment. And certainly I see this across my work in the Institute of Leadership, across professions. We're seeing very similar trends. People are overwhelmed, they're exhausted, they're anxious. There's a lot of grief, there's a lot of loss, there's a lot of anticipatory grief around the unknown future ahead of us all. So thank you for that. And just in sticking with the sort of how we currently are, just to move on. Oops, okay. Yeah. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this Kubler-Ross cycle. It is the grief cycle, actually, but it's also been adapted and for change and how we go through change. So, particularly in the current COVID situation, it's really important to recognize where you are on this curve, and just to talk through it, the 7 stages in this change curve. And it's important to say that it's not a neat process where we go through all 7 neatly in a row. We can actually move back and forth on this scale. But most people do experience these range of emotions when we're dealing with any change. The important thing is to acknowledge where you're at and to try and move yourself through the change curve to the stage really of integration and acceptance. So as we go through this, I'd really like people just in the chat box just to pop in where, which stage resonates with you at the moment. And the first stage is really that shock or surprise. And if we go back a few weeks when things were really kicking off, I think many of us were really at that point of just shock and what is this? And then we move into the denial. Is this a bad dream? Is this a bit surreal? Did anyone else feel that they're waking up going, is this actually happening? Then we're getting into sort of frustration and anger even, and that sense of, why can't I go and visit my parents, or why can't I sit in the park? Even today I saw, the guards were moving people along and they were socially distancing, just sitting on the grass, and I was getting a bit frustrated myself at that. People can then move after that sort of anger and that sort of high energy into more of a low mood and a dip in energy and that sort of depression. And you might find yourself at the moment wanting to isolate a bit or bunker down and not really want to engage with people. So that's the depression stage. Then moving through to the experiment phase, when okay, this is the current reality now. How can I engage? How can I do things differently? How can I organize a webinar? Moving through to the decision stage, which is really learning to work in the new situation and feeling a bit more positive, a little bit more in control of what's happening. And maybe with the government announcements this week, having some sort of a roadmap is helping people at that stage. And then moving really into integration, where the changes are integrated, you're in that acceptance and you're in that renewal stage. So again, really interested to hear how people are on this cycle and where you would place yourself. And just while we're doing that, Katrina, if I can go to you, please, it would be great to hear your insights as to how you found this change curve.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think like everybody, it was a bit of a shock. I was a bit more prepared. I had colleagues in Singapore who had gone through it a couple of weeks ahead of us. And so as soon as I knew it was in Ireland, I kind of was expecting the back-to-back teams, the shutdown, the closed schools, and I was pretty quick. I didn't really have denial or frustration, but I kind of quickly went into a bit of a depression for the first week or two, because the Institute really doesn't have a role. And I was thinking we all need to be out in pharmacies. And in a way, there was this dash of people who wanted to come and help, but it was a bit disorganized. And I had to kind of really cool the heels a little bit and go, okay, the best thing I can do right now is stay out of the way, cancel practice review, not put anything else on anybody's plate, let them get on with it, and then see where we can help. And I suppose that was the experimenting and the going out to the PSPs and asking, what can we do? And starting to go into decision making and kind of integrating. So, this is something we wouldn't have done before, because we would have felt people are too busy, they don't want to do a webinar. And yet having that's 200 people, like you were saying earlier, Mary, most webinars in the evening, you maybe get 30, 40 people to have that level of engagement. So, I think for me, I was much luckier I felt incredibly depressed and frustrated for people in community pharmacy and hospital pharmacy who were being thrown into these situations, who were, like in the first couple of days in particular, everything was a bit crazy. And I really felt, it was not maybe as strong as depression, but I felt a bit of despair, or not, I didn't feel like I was doing very much to help. But I suppose I often use the analogy of it's like a goalkeeper. Once a goalkeeper is doing penalty shootouts, he is more likely to, or she is more likely to save the goals by staying in the middle of the goal. But that doesn't look particularly impressive, particularly if a ball goes past you. And actually, it feels like you're doing more when you dash to one side or the other, even though your statistics of saving the goal are actually lower. And so I felt a bit like that. I should be doing something, but I'm not sure what, and kind of frustrated that I wasn't able to help more. But now kind of feeling, okay, I can see how the Institute can help more. We're working now with the HSE much more closely than we ever did before. We're starting to really support around areas of infection control. So I suppose that was it for me. And the whole personal thing, sure, no more than anybody else, trying to juggle home and parents and children and work and logistics. I think we were all in the same boat. So I cycle through bits of it, I suppose, Mary. I go forward and back.
Great.
And just to give you an insight into, there's a lot of comments coming through, so thanks for all of those. The majority of the people of pharmacists on here tonight are putting themselves at decision, but with a few in depression, a few at the experiment stage, a few at the integration stage. One comment that we got through, which I think kind of somewhat sums up what is coming through in the comments, is that they're at decision with a dash of frustration and a spritz of integration. So I think that just put it very eloquently there. But certainly, yeah, mainly decision, but that it isn't, as you mentioned, it's not something they're staying at. It can tend to go into some of the other stages, like frustration or experiment or integration.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alicia. That's really interesting, and great to see people are sort of at that, starting to feel a bit more positive, a bit more in control. And even the fact you're on this webinar tonight shows that you're doing something practically to sort of support you as you move forward with this situation. Okay, super. I want to talk now for a moment around negativity bias. And this is essentially our ancient psychological system for dealing with threat. And we are naturally more attuned to the negative. And Professor Seligman, who I'm going to be referring to throughout this evening, he talks about the Teflon and Velcro, and that when we have a bad experience, it tends to be like Velcro. We sort of remember it, it sticks with us. And the good experiences tend to be like Teflon, they sort of bounce off us. So we're naturally hardwired to notice and remember negative situations. And it's really important then that we offset that with positivity and optimism. And even if you think about, if you've had a difficult day, we'll tend to zone in on, the negative parts of that day, and maybe not appreciate and recognize the small glimmers of positivity that happened throughout the day. So that is our ancient system, and it does help us survive, but it does not help us thrive. And really what we want is we want to thrive and flourish. So just talking about optimism, and without getting too theoretical about it, I just wanted to share with you the work of an Australian psychologist, Dr. Martin Newman. He's done wonderful research on emotional intelligence and leadership. And I have resources in a link at the end of this presentation, and I'd really encourage you to have go to his site and have a look at his blogs and his videos. But he talks about people who are high in optimism. They're looking on the positive side of life, and they're sensing opportunities even in the face of adversity. They're resilient, they can see the big picture, where they're going, and they can focus on the possibilities of what can be achieved. And optimistic people bounce back from defeat. So when they're going through a tough time, they can sort of dust themselves off and get back up on their feet. And in Dr. Newman's research, particularly in challenging times, leaders who are high in optimism, it's one of the most important qualities to be successful, to be fulfilled, to be happy. So that's a little bit, if you like, on the definition of what optimism is. Now, we've been having some interesting chats, Katrina and I, about optimism in pharmacy, and she introduced me to a really interesting concept around professional pessimism. So I'm going to just ask Katrina to share some insights with us around that whole area, please.
Yeah, I will. I don't know if any of you on the call are like me, but sometimes when, and no offense, Mary, but some of these psychologists who come in with their airy-fairy ideas about optimism, and they haven't been standing in a shop all day for 9 hours straight, social distancing, trying to keep masks on, you just think, oh, really get real. And sometimes optimism is maybe more in the area of gamblers. They're great at being optimistic. But as pharmacists, our job isn't to be optimistic and hope that all will sort itself out. Our job is to find faults and anticipate them and prevent them, to look down the road to where the contraindications might be, or where the interactions might be, or where the subtherapeutic or over therapeutic dosings are. And, you know, I suppose one of the things I've seen repeatedly, particularly with young graduates and with students, is that that absolute rigor, which is so necessary in pharmacy, can spill over into your own life and your personal life. And I think that's something that we need to be so careful about. So the idea of professional pessimism, it may sound negative, but it's actually really, really important and really useful and really positive. So being pessimistic when you look at a patient medication record to say, where could the problems be here, and using our expertise to address them, is what we're paid to do. It's what we're good at. It's what we're needed for. It would be no good if we looked at a PMR and say, sure, let's give it a try, bit of a cocktail of drugs there, but sure, who knows? That wouldn't work. So for me, optimism sometimes can clash with that concept. And I suppose that's, Mary, the challenge I'd put to you to make this a really relevant webinar, because I've been on plenty of webinars where people are talking about the ideal world and how we should be optimistic and get out those rose-tinted glasses. And I suppose my challenge to you is a little bit, and it's a healthy challenge, you and I both know each other a long time, is, well, how do you reconcile those two?
Yes, and it's really important to acknowledge that. I think particularly the nature of the work of pharmacy, as you say, it is about having that critical eye and that professional pessimism. However, when we consider life outside of work, it's about that switching of gears. And what I would I think this whole the Stockdale paradox, some of you may be familiar with this. This is Admiral James Stockdale, who was tortured quite violently during the Vietnam War. And he came up this whole concept of the Stockdale paradox, which is staying simultaneously optimistic and grounded. And really his key point here is that you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. So this is the notion of being of having realistic optimism. It's not a Pollyanna view of the world, you know, it's all going to be fine, but it's about having, it's really protecting your hope. That's what we're talking about here, protecting your hope.
I think that works for me, Mary, a bit more. Yeah, and maybe I'm the only one. I don't know. Maybe the others are sitting there thinking, "God, your woman's very negative." But for me, I just think we're actually trained within an inch of our life to be very rigorous, and some people do that brilliantly. But sometimes I found, certainly when I was younger, it tipped over sometimes, and I didn't even realize it because that was just such a natural way for me to think. So, this concept of being optimistic, but also understanding that you're in the middle of something that you just need to face and you can't just be optimistic about everything, marries the two for me. But I don't know if people can say in the comments box if they have any issues or not. But yeah, thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, Katrina. Okay, so I want to move on to talk about learned optimism. And this is a really important point that Professor Martin Seligman and his team of researchers, this is a very rigorous science now, and positive psychology has been with us for over 20 years and continues to grow as a discipline in psychology. Professor Martin Seligman would describe himself as a natural born pessimist, which I think is really interesting. Um, but the whole notion here is that optimism can be developed, and it's like a muscle that we can develop. So this is a brilliant book that he's written, Learn to Optimism, How to Change Your Mind and Your Life. And sadly, Professor Seligman was due to be in Dublin in RCSI next week. Yet another thing cancelled out of the diary, but hopefully he will be back at another stage. But he is doing really phenomenal work in this whole area. And his research has shown that people who do demonstrate high levels of optimism, they have better health and wellness. In fact, some of his studies on head and neck cancer patients are showing significantly better levels of quality of life post-treatment. He's also done studies with breast cancer survivors where they're exhibiting less symptoms of distress during their treatment. You're less likely to develop high blood pressure and heart disease if you are high in optimism. And more than that, the research is telling us people high in optimism have better relationships, more successful careers. So it is a very important attribute to start developing. And I would encourage you to have a look at Seligman's work around learned optimism, particularly going back to the negativity bias. If we're more hardwired to sort of focus on the negative, how can we become more optimistic in nature? So these are some of the explanatory style. This is really our self-talk, how we talk to ourselves. And the research has shown that some of the key differences between people who take more of a pessimistic view versus an optimistic view. And it's really around the 3 Ps. The first is pessimists think, this is permanent, this will last forever. This is pervasive, this will undermine everything, and this is personal, it's all my fault. So if you even take the example of, let's say, you've had a bit of an issue with a colleague in work, you've had a bit of a run-in, the pessimist will think, oh, this situation, this relationship is damaged forever, this is going to undermine all of the work environment in our pharmacy, and it's all my fault. Whereas an optimist will think, this will pass. This is just a temporary, we've just had a difference of opinion. This just refers to the one instant, and, it's not entirely my fault. And importantly, the optimist thinks, there is something I can do about this. This is controllable. Versus a pessimistic viewpoint is, there's nothing I can do, and sort of to give up hope, really. So that's our explanatory styles, which is a really important concept within positive psychology and optimism. Okay, and maybe again, Katrina, if you don't mind, if I can come back to you, as somebody, you've very openly shared that you are more of a pessimist by nature. What have you found has helped you to develop more an optimistic outlook?
Yeah, I would. I would be a pessimist. Not terribly so, but I tend to get quite low mood. I wouldn't be one of those people who's, people would think I'm quite extroverted. I'm actually quite introverted in where I get my energy from. So I suppose it's just finding my strengths and identifying things that give me energy is the very first thing. I find when I'm not playing to my strengths and I don't have the right sort of energy, I tend to lag a little bit. But I found I actually did do work with Martin Seligman's book and the ABC approach to looking at something and thinking about what your reaction is and then debating that. I have engaged in a lot of that where and I've got some really good trusted friends and colleagues around me who will often hold me to account and say, well, now, Katrina, is that really going to, and Mary, you've done it yourself, is that not a little bit negative?
Yeah,
so sometimes you just need people around you because, when you're in it, you don't really know that you're in it. That's the way you see the world. So yeah, they'd be some of the things I suppose that I found helpful.
Thanks, Katrina. Great. So that leads us, I think, on to practical strategies. So what can you do, and what does the research tell us? What works around developing a more optimistic mindset, to really help with your resilience and to help you sort of weather the challenges that we're facing. and it looks like it will continue for the foreseeable. So the first one I want to share with you is the whole concept of gratitude. Now, gratitude is the other side of the coin of optimism, and really fascinating research from Duke University. And it's called the three good things. Now, those of you who are active on Twitter may be familiar with this. It's really, it's becoming really, really popular as a concept. And quite simply, it is the research tells us that every evening, within 2 hours of going to sleep, so ideally before you go to sleep at night, that you would note three good things that happened to you during the day that you're grateful for. And importantly, not only just to note them, but what was your role in those three good things. Now, we know from the research, if you do this consecutively for 14 nights, the studies have shown that it is as effective as antidepressants for people with mild to moderate depression. So really interesting research on this, and I'd encourage you to go to that link. Professor Brian Sexton, who's doing a lot of work in this area, has a very nice video on that link to explain more about this. The good thing is this research has all been done in a health setting as well. So I would encourage you to each night, and ideally you would write down, or to capture those three things that have been good, and try and be as specific as you can. So for example, it could be, today I had a really positive engagement with the patient and they were quite distressed, and I helped reassure them. It could be I enjoyed a really nice meal with my wife, husband, boyfriend, whatever. I got to spend some time cycling with the children, some quality time with the children. So three good things that you are grateful for each night, and you will be absolutely amazed at the impact of this. And I'd just like to share with you, there's an app, a simple app you can download, penzo.com, so penzu.com, and that allows you to capture your three things, and it also sends you a reminder to do it. So again, this is a simple ritual, but again, it's very effective. And just the research tells us that gratitude has been found to increase well-being, greater life satisfaction, sense of connectedness to others, and greater physical health. In fact, it improves your sleep quality. So I think it's definitely an important one to consider. So that's the first one. Moving on then to the second one, which is all about your strengths. So some of you may have had the opportunity to complete via the strengths profile that was sent in the invite. Don't worry at all if you didn't. I would encourage you to go and complete the character strengths profile, because we know that our strengths energize us. And the first thing is actually understanding, what are my signature strengths? And then it's important that you actually engage with them on a regular basis. So this VIA character strengths profile will identify your top 5 signature strengths. And just to share just a simple example, and we were, discussing this earlier, turns out we both have love of learning up there high on the list. And for me, that's about, doing a webinar, listening to a podcast, just continuing to learn and grow in the areas I'm interested in. And that really energizes me and improves my mood and my overall well-being. And we know that character strengths reduce the likelihood of distress, and they encourage greater happiness, acceptance, and better physical and mental health. So again, a lot of good research coming out of the VIA Institute. This is a free profile that anyone can take. There's also an under 18s version. So if you've children, I think it's really worthwhile getting them to really understand what their strengths are. And important as well that we don't overplay our strengths. So back to my love of learning example, I could spend, I just need to be, mindful that I'm not overdoing it on the learning, and actually start applying the learning that I have had. So again, it is all about those, those personality strengths, and making sure that you are using them, engaging them. Now, again, I'd like to just turn to Katrina for this one, because I'm sure in pharmacy it mightn't always be possible to play to your strengths. So what are your thoughts on that, Katrina?
Yeah, I was sharing with Mary earlier that there's sometimes you'll find yourself in a role that isn't necessarily allowing you to play to your strengths. And, you know, I see this with people at different stages of their career. So if humanity is very important to somebody, that interaction and social intelligence, they're the pharmacists that I tend to find veering towards being out at the front of the counter, very much engaged with patients, really hands-on. And then there's other people who are far more, I suppose, want that space, and it may be something about introversion, or it may be something to do with, you know, the control of things and delivery, and they may prefer to be in a dispensary doing a lot of quality work. But what I find is if you don't get the chance to play to your strengths, you'll sometimes get very frustrated. So, you know, in the current situation, I know pharmacists who've reported just being depleted. You know, they're still working in the same pharmacy with the same customers and the same team, but actually what they've noticed is, and it was one on our PSP network that it was raised, it was really the fact that he wasn't getting to interact as closely, this social distancing and separation from his patients. And he came onto the webinar because he was saying, I need to get that connection some other way. And many people on the webinar tonight may well just wanted to connect with their profession. The people that they worked with in their dispensary may well be now working back to them, and they're just not getting that. So if you don't get it in your job all the time, my advice is always try and find it somewhere in your life, in your hobbies, in your interests. Your work doesn't have to be the be all and end all necessarily. So I've been coaching somebody recently who really wants to find exactly what the job that's perfect for them. And we've come to the conclusion that it may not be possible to find the perfect job, but to find a job that allows them to pursue their interests as well in parallel could actually be a really good mix. So I suppose if people are finding that they've got strengths that they're not necessarily able to bring forth in the current situation, trying to find other ways in which to do that. If it's connection, you know, taking up the phone to call somebody, making that extra effort, may be a way to do it. So yeah, that I think that's what you were talking about when we were
Yeah.
spoke earlier, was it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Katrina. And that leads us nicely to the third takeaway, which is about cultivating positive relationships. So we know from all the research on behavioral sciences that the single biggest predictor of your well-being is the quality of your relationships. And it's so important to our health, our well-being. And I'm just have a quote here from Beth Frates, who is in Harvard Medical School in the lifestyle medicine area. This Beth spoke at RCSI last year, and she says relationships at work and at home are critical to our health and wellness. Work to cultivate high quality connections with people by showing respect, listening, and sharing your own true feelings. So now we're all physically distancing, but now more than ever, I think we need to socially and emotionally connect with each other. And that can be, you know, Skype, a Zoom call, just a telephone call to have a rant with a friend, just to express how you're feeling at the moment. And particularly connecting in with people who do have more of a positive and uplifting approach, because I also wanted to mention the whole concept of emotional contagion. So emotions are contagious, and particularly those of you who are managing teams, you know, it is important that you're managing your emotions well at the moment, because that will have an effect on the people around you. So try to, you know, engage with people who are uplifting and positive and build you up. And I would encourage you um, to reach out to people at the moment, and to build those connections. And um, you know, even just with the Institute of Pharmacy, I think the excellent work you're doing with the peer support network, that to me is a great case study in that connection and cultivating strong relationships within the profession. So again, just I would encourage you to consider, you know, is there somebody out there that you have been meaning to connect with, and just to arrange a call, um, have a, you know, have just a good old fashioned telephone call, or write to them, or connect with them in some way. So really just to recap on our 3 practical strategies. The first one is gratitude, the 3 good things. So just before bedtime, to capture the 3 specific things that went well for you during the day. The second is to really understand and engage with your strengths, your signature strengths, because that will improve our overall mood. It will energize us. It will keep us, really build our resilience at this time, keep our energy up. And the third one is about cultivating positive relationships and really connecting in with people who will support us at the moment and build us up. So there are just some ideas to help you to build resilience and optimism at the moment. And I do hope out of that list that there's even one thing that you can apply in your working life. There's resources here for people who are interested. There's the Learn to Optimism Stanford test, the emotional capital resources, Seligman's positive psychology, and a little bit more information on the gratitude research if you'd like to read further into that. So at this point, I would just like to thank everybody for their engagement. It's been really great connecting with you all, and amazing to have these numbers on a Wednesday evening. So I do hope that session gives you at least 1 or 2 things to work on to build your optimism at the moment. Oh,
Katrina, I think you're muted there.
sorry, Katrina.
Thank you, Mary. That has been a really, really pragmatic and helpful way of looking at things. So thank you. I'm going to do the boring bit now. And I'm going to say, well, let's think about your impact on practice and think about how you can reflect on, sorry, I'm in the wrong setting mode. Swap presenter view, there we go. So if you can think about, reflect on this. So what are we going to take away from this evening? You know, you've spent an hour of your precious, precious time, and I'm not necessarily suggesting you go onto the IIOP website and log a cycle, although while you're in front of your screen, you could well do. But what I would suggest is just stop for a minute. Just stop. You've had a really busy day. You've come into this now. You probably have other duties that you're going on to. What could you do? Is it to make your list of 3? Is it to pick up the phone to somebody? Is it to think about your strengths and give yourself that space? But how has this actually impacted that you're going to do something different tomorrow would be my question to you. What I'd also like to ask you is, before we go on, I suppose before I do that, I'll give you the space to reflect. I want to say a very sincere thank you to Mary, and we're going to open the chat box just for any final questions. We've about 4 or 5 minutes before we finish up, and Alicia will give us some themes. If you can do the menti.com again though, what I would say to you is, if you put in your code there, tell us what other topics you'd like to see in future webinars. Now that can be clinical, non-clinical, it can be more of what we've kind of touched on this evening, but just give us a 1 word, you know, as to what sort of thing you'd like, and we'll take that feedback on board, because we really do want to understand what you want from us and how we can best support you. So if you can start doing that, I will just make sure that we are on the right slide here. So there you go. What other topics would you like to see addressed? If you can put that in on your Menti form when you use that code, that will give us a good sense of where there might be some commonalities. Is that working, Alicia?
Yes, that's working fine.
Okay, perfect. Before I hand over, what I would say is a massive thank you to Mary. And in case I forget to say it, we will be running these weekly for the foreseeable future. And the one next week is with our colleagues in the HSE, Marie Philbin and Ciara Kirk, both pharmacists, working in various different parts of the HSE. And we'd like to help provide support on infection control in community pharmacy specifically. So it's open to everybody, but we will be discussing that issue. Now, if I just go and see what our Menti is saying, we've got, people are starting to put that in. So I'll come back to that at the end, Alicia. If you can, there's some really good comments that have come through. I saw that Nicola was saying that the optimists and the extroverts are probably, they have been shown to be suffering a little bit more in the current situation, because that's depleting their particular strengths. So I don't know, Mary, if you have any words of advice for people who have those characteristics, what they could be doing to protect themselves.
Oh, absolutely. I can say as an extrovert feeling person, it's very challenging, particularly when you're social, you know, even those coffees, those lunches, where we get our energy as extroverts from being with people. So it is about making more of a concerted effort to set up the Zoom calls. I know it's not the same, but even on a at the weekends to try and do a social Zoom call with friends and just be more proactive in and creative in how you can connect with people now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mary. And it's incredible, a number of people empathizing there with the understanding now how much they rely on the interaction with customers, and actually quite surprised at how much the social distancing is impacting on their communication. Any words of advice there, Mary?
Yes, I mean, so much of communication is around the nonverbals, and I think I know you're going to be talking about PPE and even masks. Like we are limiting the connection. So I think it's important to remember the pillars of communication, which are really the tone, the body language, and the words that we use, and just to try and show our empathy and care in different ways if we're going to struggle with that the distancing piece.
Okay.
Mm.
I'm continuing to look at this, so I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to, well, Alicia, are there any particular comments that we need to address before we finish up? I'm mindful of people's time.
No, a few people just asking if it's possible to get the recorded version of this. So we will make that available. Some people just were a few minutes late. Otherwise, no particular questions, but a lot of people thanking you, Katrina and Mary, and saying it was very helpful and very practical, and that they appreciated the sharing and the honesty that they saw. But I'll keep an eye, but no other questions through as yet.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody for their contribution this evening, for being here, for sharing your time. I'm just looking at the information that you've asked for on Menti. Just give me 1 second and see where this is at. Sometimes all of these screens are sorry, this is screen 1, screen 2. No, I can't see it. We'll include it in the thing that we give out, but what's coming very clearly is teamwork, leadership, communication. So Mary, I think we might have you back at some stage, because all of those topics align very nicely with your area, and I see lots of people nodding their heads. I'm going to leave the last word to you, if you don't mind, because people hear enough of me. But I suppose you've heard some of the comments, you've given us a really, really insightful couple of pointers that have been really pragmatic and realistic. You've taken my challenges about how this applies to pharmacy, and you've met them and countered them, so thank you for that. So yeah, how would you like to finish up?
Well, I would just like to express my gratitude to everyone on the call. I mean, you know, it continues. I continue to really be so inspired by the pharmacy profession, because I think your connection and support of each other is so important now more than ever. So I would just say continue to keep that connection, support, collaboration. And if I may say, you have an exceptional leader of your institute. So thanks so much to Katrina for really turning this around in literally days. And we were just joking earlier, you know, this is one of the silver linings of COVID. Beforehand, this would have taken months to organize and red tape, but thankfully we can see action now. So thanks so much to the Institute, and I wish you all well over the difficult times ahead. And you know, please do dip into those resources and try your gratitude tonight, your 3 good things.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Alicia, and to everybody in the Institute team. And thank you especially to you who have logged on this evening. Have a very pleasant remainder of the evening. And hopefully we'll see many of you at a future webinar. They'll always be on Wednesday at 8 p.m. And we'll communicate with you as to the topics that are covered on a week-by-week basis. We try to keep them contemporaneous, so we don't have a schedule. We'll be led by you. And we look forward to connecting with you again, and feel free to contact us if there's anything in particular you'd like to see addressed. Okay? Good night, and thank you, Mary.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Katrina. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Mary.
a million.
Bye, Mary.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye, Mary.
Thanks, Leonie.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you both.
Thank you. It's really interesting seeing people pass by as they all head off for their evenings. It's a very different way of life now, isn't it?
Thank you very much.
Very different.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina and everyone.
Thanks, Patricia. You were one of the PSPs that told us to do this, so take a bow.
Well, good to see you playing to your strengths.
Yes.
yeah. But we got a lot out of that PSP call, so we'll certainly we're continuing a number of them. Yeah, thank you.
It was much better than the leaflet we got from the HSE today. Are you eating right? Are you exercising? You know,
well,
I'll send it to you. You can have a laugh.
Yeah.
Okay, good night, and thank you all again.
Thank you, Patricia. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See you, Geraldine. I leave it on for a little while. Sometimes people end it straight away, but if anybody wants to leave in any comments, you lose them if you stop the meeting too fast. So that's why I'm just leaving it run for a little bit longer. Normally you just kick people out, which I'd never like to do. Somebody has just joined us. I'm afraid you're too late. Sorry. I've admitted you, but sorry, we'll send you the recording.
Hello, Katrina. Thank you very much indeed. And do you know something? I think that it's worth remembering that there's very few jobs that you can do in which you can actually make a difference. And I think we're very lucky in pharmacy that we're in a job that we can make a difference to people's lives. Yeah. So thank you very much indeed.
That's a lovely optimistic note to end on. Thank you so much there. That's a wonderful, wonderful thought.